The Florida House of Representatives have passed a bill that would ratchet up the drug war, including a new opioid mandatory minimum. So the state house yesterday voted unanimously 118-0 for a bill that will ratchet up Florida's drug war, enact new mandatory minimum sentences for opioid users and dealers, and create new prohibitions against trafficking drugs, including fentanyl and synthetic marijuana. The bill, called HB 477, was proposed by GOP representatives Kathleen Peters and Charlie Stone as a way to supposedly deter drug dealers from trafficking or selling opioids. Now let's break down this bill a little bit more. In short, the 167-page bill would label fentanyl, fentanyl mixtures, and other more powerful synthetic opiates as Schedule I drugs, except for pharmaceutical purposes. Label anyone caught with 4 grams or more of fentanyl as a fentanyl trafficker, subject to a mandatory 3-year prison term. Force people caught with 14 grams of fentanyl to serve 15 years in prison, and send people caught with 28 grams of fentanyl to jail for 25 years. Judges would have 0 discretion to alter those sentencing. There are also similar mandatory sentencing brackets for synthetic cannabinoids, that's a word to say, and they also add codeine to the list of drugs. Now we're really gonna get into the discussion about mandatory minimums and what purpose that they serve, but just to remind everyone, this is a quote from Greg Newbern, the state policy director of Families Against Mandatory Minimums. He says, quote, "We had a heroin mandatory minimum law for 18 years. Lawmakers promised us it would deter drug use, but now we're in the midst of the worst heroin crisis we've ever seen. And the answer to that is to pass another mandatory minimum." It brings up a good question. Guys, I wanna hear from you. Why is it so popular, even though we know with concrete evidence that mandatory minimums do not deter drug users from getting clean? Why do we see these mandatory minimums still being passed?
Certain mandatory minimums in the prosecution process are a way to leverage those convicted of those crimes into treatment programs.
Okay.
That's the only thing. Other than that, they're pretty ridiculous. Like federal crimes, no. Nonviolent federal drug offenders, that's not a thing. That is 5% of those who are convicted. But these things, I get it. And then you have to look at why it was unanimous. And everyone who votes for this is an easy vote by and large to say I'm tough on crime. The Senate, there's 2 bills. There's one in the House and there's one in the Senate. The Senate one has something that's pretty standard in state mandatory minimums, which is a safety valve for the judge to make a decision to say, I'm gonna undo that. So anything where, and California has it where there's 3 levels of potential sentences, a high, medium, and minimum, and then the judge kind of decides, and they give safety valves. But usually it seems like it's successful if they're like, do you want to go to jail for 5 years or do you want to go to a treatment program? And then they plea into the treatment program, and having some kind of minimum is a way to do that, as opposed to 30 days in jail and they're back on the street going and doing that. That said, that's for heroin, carfentanil, fentanyl, crazy ass drugs. Like those are 10,000 times stronger than morphine. But synthetic marijuana, like that's, why is that in this bill?
Wait, is that edibles? What is that?
I think that's an attempt from, and I don't know as much as I should about synthetic marijuana.
Yeah, so I'll break it down a little bit further. So first of all, if fentanyl wasn't a Schedule I drug already, marijuana is a Schedule I drug. So that's already weird and insane, because fentanyl is disastrous, right? It's used, the worst of the worst.
Yeah, it's used for surgery, for insane amounts of pain. It's just, yeah, it's a Schedule I drug that should be a Schedule I drug. It's not in the same camp as marijuana.
So, okay, so if you were being fair, marijuana would be nowhere near Schedule I and fentanyl would. On the other hand, I don't think any of it should be illegal, even fentanyl, because look, first of all, don't take fentanyl. Right. I mean, if it's 10,000 times worse than morphine, are you insane? Don't take it. And if you do, you don't have much time left. I'm not kidding. I mean, it is quite often very, very deadly. So you're in already disastrous shape. But do we think we're gonna stop it by imprisoning the people selling it, let alone the people that's possessing it? If they're possessing it, they got more problems than your prison sentence. They got a fentanyl problem, right?
Yeah.
And the people selling, it's never the supply, it's always the demand. So, but we're never gonna learn this stupid lesson. And then you add on top of it the 0 discretion, right? But that's the whole point of a judge, is for him to exercise judgment. Was he selling boatloads of fentanyl and people weren't gonna take it, but somehow he made them take it? Or the guy had an edible over there. And again, I don't know that it applies to edibles, right? Whatever the hell synthetic marijuana is, right? So, well, no, I want the judge to have discretion there, right?
Yeah.
What do you mean zero discretion?
Yeah, and something else that they bring up is that there is a major problem with counterfeit pills right now. So someone could be thinking that they're buying Oxy. Of course, none of this is something that we would recommend, but someone could think that they're buying Oxy. In fact, they bought some fentanyl, they get caught with that, and they're behind bars. You know, I mean, that's what we're talking about here. This is an insane ratcheting up of the war on drugs.
It's so difficult. The whole process is so difficult because it's the intersection of, especially in Florida. Florida is like where a lot of the fentanyl arrives.
Yeah.
And they have, when you'll see it explode first there. They are the first, they and Chicago were the first two to have like elephant tranquilizer, carfentanil, we talked about it on this show, like show up. It is such a difficult situation. And then what scares the hell out of legislators who are trying to set like the agenda and leave enough wiggle room by and large to let like the judges say what the sentencing is. It's just those legislators, if they're gonna say we're gonna decriminalize heroin, like you need a lot to back that up. And if that fails, then you're out of a job. And I don't know, it's such a big leap. It's such a big, I get the marijuana thing, we're doing that. We're making it legal in California, Colorado, Washington. But to say you're gonna do that to like these opiates is really difficult, but it just might be what's necessary in order to treat it like a mental.
Well, I was gonna say, I think that we need to at least
issue.
see some sort of a shift in how we talk about drug addiction. Instead of talking about it as like these criminals that we just want them locked away, they're not safe to be around, they're not safe to be on the streets, let's put them away. I think we do need to lean in a little bit more and have a conversation about what is drug addiction and how can we treat these people and not just like how can we lock them up and get them off the streets.
Yeah, I just don't think the mandatory minimum discussion is far enough along, or I don't think that mandatory minimums mean something to enough people right now.
I agree.
Mandatory minimums sound like an answer that representatives give to their constituents when they're saying, there's so much heroin, what are we gonna do about it? All these junkies are in my yard, like those calls you get from your constituents, and the representatives just say, stronger laws.
It's also a different conversation when we're talking about opiates than when we're talking about weed. So I think we can all agree that when we're talking about marijuana use, that as it's listed as a Schedule I drug, okay, those mandatory minimums don't jive. But we know that opiates are a serious drug, and there's serious ramifications, and so we want some sort of treatment for it. We want something to happen. There should be a consequence if you are trafficking heroin or fentanyl. But what I think we agree on is that the mandatory minimums as they are right now is not that. It's not treating it effectively.
So yeah, no, I don't agree to anything. I think this is all mental. So we allow the pharmaceutical companies sell OxyContin, by the barrels, and that gets people hooked in the first place. That leads to heroin, it leads to fentanyl. But that's all perfectly legal, well, as long as it's a good racket and you're making money off of it, right? So you can get hooked on alcohol and nobody's gonna put you in prison. You can get hooked on OxyContin and nobody's gonna put you in prison. But if you get hooked on things that they're not making a profit off of, then you're going to prison. Prison? Why? That doesn't make any sense. Could you imagine if we locked up all the alcoholics? No, I mean, it's preposterous, right? They need help, they need treatment. Not like, we'll show you. Why don't you get a mandatory minimum? See how you like beer then. They're alcoholic, it's not gonna make a difference. So this is all about who's making money and who's not making money. Criminalizing it doesn't work, it's never worked. It leads to gangs, it leads to violence, and prohibition leads to more use rather than less use. And now countries that have decriminalized marijuana and other drugs have shown that when you decriminalize, you get less usage, less addiction, let alone the money you're saving, let alone this prison industrial complex that we've created here in America for no reason, where we lock up huge percentages of our population. No, I say no to all of it. No, this is exactly the wrong direction. Membership helps fund the Young Turks. You know one great thing about that? That means we're not accountable to anyone but you guys. That's why we're strong together, because we built this show around you. Come build it even bigger and better at tytnetwork.com/join.